Welcome to the Cannabis Review. We've got a great episode for you today. I am delighted to be joined by Anand Shahi, the President and the Chief Investment Officer for Bar Capital. How are you keeping today, Anand?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
No, absolutely pleasure to have you on. I hope you're going to shine some great insights into the few of the questions that I've got for you. Do you want to basically give everybody a little background on what Bar Capital are doing in the industry and how you got into the cannabis sector?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll start with my background. I'm a finance person to the bone. I've worked in various different companies in the financial industry here in the US, based out of New York. Worked at firms like Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley. I've done everything from managing assets for high net worth individuals to managing risk for Morgan Stanley. And in that period, as I was doing my corporate career, I was also in parallel investing in startups and small and micro cap companies in certain sectors. What I realized as I was doing that is there's a lot of value when you have a specialty and you have a deep dive into a vertical. And what started to happen was I realized that cannabis was all of those things with a completely new and nascent industry where it could be shaped, and knowing the right people and connecting with the right folks and investing in the right companies could literally make an impact on people's daily lives. And as a personal purpose, I made sure that everybody who joins Bar Capital knows that our purpose is to make cannabis as culturally accepted and common as aspirin or alcohol, or paracetamol and alcohol, I guess in this case. And so that purpose drives me every morning. I get up early, I go to bed late night. I talk to people in Europe, US, China, Mexico. I am very much looped into what's happening behind the scenes in particular. And so that's how Bar Capital has come around. And we have been doing outreach to Europe. And I'm very glad to meet folks like yourself and your program, because we think it's a global industry that's going to only get bigger and bigger as the years come by right now.
Okay, perfect. That kind of gives everybody a little overview. I'm going to jump straight into the first topic, and I think I'd love to get somebody like you to be able to maybe clear some of the muddy waters so far. In terms of the overview of the current investment landscape in the world, you've got North America, let's say the US have state-by-state only investment. You can't invest across or have companies compete across states. The Canadian companies seem to have burned through so much money now that it's almost a fool's errand, and buyer beware when it comes to a Canadian LLP and investment. Europe seems to be technically leaning towards the medical side first and foremost. How are you looking at in terms of investment strategies for Bar Capital? Do you have a separate strategy for Europe that you do for North America, or do you see it all assimilating into one industry over time?
That's a great question. This industry is so fractured. If you're in New Jersey as a company involved in cannabis, or Massachusetts here in the United States, or any of these individual states, you might as well be in Europe if you're trying to interact with another company, right? You can't cross the border. And so what that creates is some unique investment opportunities that are interstate plays or geographical plays. But what we focus on is the scalable businesses and the brands. So we wrote a short white paper a year ago, actually, when COVID was hitting and the cannabis industry was in a lot of trouble, and a lot of stocks had kind of crashed, and we had other issues from before that. But we wrote a paper called "The Bold Shall Conquer Cannabis," and what we argued for was that you want to focus on businesses that can be effective in New Jersey or Ireland or UK or wherever, and be able to scale at a very fast level and become a global presence. And so that involves a few key aspects. Number one is you have to have the right kind of management and the right kind of vision. Number two is you need connectivity and relationships. That's where Bar Capital comes in. We do help, we invest in, we advise, and we do help raise funding for startups and companies that are growing in the cannabis space. But our consulting side and our strategic advisory side, which is connected with players in the UK as well, and in Europe as well, is all about supply chain and offtake agreements and connecting the right kind of companies to each other so that they can scale together and they can scale up into geographies that they haven't entered before. That's going to be pertinent in North America, especially in the US. It's going to be pertinent for transatlantic communications and deals. And so we're really differentiating ourselves on that front, because this, like I was saying before, this is a global story, and people are not understanding that this is going to be ubiquitous in our lives. People are going to be taking different cannabinoids, different formulations, both for medicinal purposes and for recreational purposes. And I'll give one quick example. I had a relative who had surgery and was prescribed opioids, and I suggested they get a medicinal cannabis license and use that instead. And then so they did. They were able to get that prior to the surgery. They used it afterwards and potentially avoided an addiction to opioids. And that's the kind of difference that's already been made in places where it is legalized.
Okay, that's a very concise and informative piece to that question. The next one is a pretty straightforward question, but a difficult answer, I'm sure. How do you spot a good investment opportunity in the cannabis industry, bearing in mind that there are so many rules and regulations in different territories, and everything is so much different in every different territory that you're going to want to enter? What's the best way for you to spot an investment?
That's a great question. It's spotting a great investment is like finding your future partner, right? It's there's a first date, and depending on how that goes, you might get a second date. But you start to get a sense right away if there's a click, and the click comes with management and how passionate they are about what they're doing. And sometimes it's easy to tell because their lives have been changed. Their child might have had epileptic fits all day long prior, and all medication had been tried and nothing had worked. And then cannabis came along and made a difference in that executive's life and was able to shape how they wanted to participate in the space. That's one example. Now, there's other key things we look for in management, which is, can they handle the hockey stick moment? Can they handle a pivot in the business because they were trying to build a big capex project, and instead now the market has shifted, and they should instead focus on their brand and launching products that make more sense in the current market. What you'll see, and you mentioned this earlier in the Canadian story, is a lot of companies went public too soon because that was the only way for them to get funded. They weren't able to create brands because the Canadian government is overly involved, and therefore they're going to suffer, and they're going to be, we're kind of shorting that market. And looking at managers that short that market. The U.S. story is just beginning. I mean, the multi-state operators are very, very attractively valued even today. We think legislation is going to change and really change the landscape. But going back to the company and spotting investments, you have to do a set of due diligence, getting to know the family part of the dating scenario analogy I was giving you, making sure the values line up, making sure, all of those things check out and their backgrounds are solid. But also getting a real sense for, do these folks have legitimate backgrounds? Early days in cannabis, there was a lot of black market participants that moved the cannabis space to what it is today and helped it get legalized in a number of geographies. But they weren't management. They weren't quality operators in the space. But what's shifted now is veterans from other industries have entered, and so we also look for folks that utilize that talent pool that's coming in from pharma, from finance, from the legal world. And that's that kind of dream team situation is what we look for, where the pieces are lined up, the messaging, the vision, the mission is being talked about by each of those members of the executive team. And when that happens, it's a magical moment. And then we usually then proceed with getting to know the company even deeper and making an investment.
Okay, brilliant. I think it's definitely a very exciting time in the US for sure. I think you've got a couple of the brands. We all know that at some stage you're going to have a Burger King and a Coca-Cola come out of the cannabis industry, and it's who gets to those investments now is such, I think, a great place to be in as a US investor as you are. Which of the brands in the US do you see being some of the dominant ones? We all know about Cookies, and we know about the Bangs and Kill Cliffs. Who do you see kind of rising to the top of the market when it comes to the US, and then maybe being a global brand within time?
So there's two parts to that. One part is the US is often late to the story and then buys its way in and then tries to become a leader. So in that interaction between the different geographies right now, Europe has the medicinal program, and it's got great R&D and IP and other talent and other valuable assets, even on the cultivation front. So the U.S. is going to continue looking to do that. I know of several of the people you're mentioning and other big names that are actively doing that. And then we all, of course, see deals like the Curaleaf EMAC deal recently. So there's certainly folks that are well capitalized, and they're going out and laying out the footprint that they need to continue scaling their brands. However, it's such a nascent market. New entrants that find the right connections and find the right capital flow and really have that brand focus can do very, very well. So I can't predict Coca-Cola or the Burger King of the space yet. Certainly, I think several of the people who are already doing quite well are going to continue to. But I wouldn't be surprised if a European brand emerges or an Asian brand emerges eventually as we mature more, and can then start capitalizing, going public, and getting a lot of capital behind their own growth. For the next 3 to 5 years, I see it being a very U.S. dominate world in terms of the brand. If you have a focus on California and Germany, for example, and now Mexico, you're in very good shape. So I think those key geographies will continue to play a big role in brand development, but it's anybody's game still.
Okay, brilliant. That kind of leads me on to the last topic that I wanted to talk about. And you were saying one of the European brands are going to do it. We're betting on that Ireland is going to be one of the countries that delivers one of these global brands. And I'd like to maybe in this little segment convince you as to why Ireland is going to be the European hub for global cannabis companies. I'm sure you'd agree that a lot of the investment opportunities and the M&As that are happening, some of the London Stock Exchange stuff, is exciting industry. So I think a lot of the North American companies are definitely going to position themselves for a European entry at some stage. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I have a special place in my heart for Ireland. I was born in India. When I was 8, I actually moved to Ireland. My parents are doctors, and they worked there, and I lived there for 6 years. And I was educated partly in Ireland, and then came to the U.S. And I can say, given where Ireland has positioned itself, the only English-speaking member right now of the EU, being known for its tax benefits to large corporations that have already from other industries utilized it as such. It's a natural landing pad for the larger companies, for innovation around this area, for brand creation, for interaction with between the US and EU. So I'm very excited. I plan on making a business trip out there and really getting a detailed sense of what the opportunities are. But I think you've already got a brand in that space. Ireland already has a brand in that space. And so it's all about how do you convert that, and how do you convince the regulators to open up more business around the cannabis space. And that, by the way, is just a snowball effect happening right now. If you look at the US and you have any kind of doubt about legalization in the US, just think of the fact that Canada and Mexico are going to be legal federally, and the US is going to be sitting there missing out on tax revenue dollars. Post-COVID, everybody wants to address deficits, and any kind of new source of revenue generation is golden. So I always, people in the industry complain that we get taxed too much. I think it's a beautiful thing to get taxed too much right now, because eventually, as the lobbying continues, as we go towards legalization and beyond, everybody's then going to start looking at tax efficiency. And Ireland's going to be very much at the nexus of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's going to be a lot of the services will be based in Ireland. A lot of the kind of B2B business operations will be based in Ireland. Granted, there might be genetics in North America, but I still think it'll make sense over time to have greenhouses set up in Ireland, extraction facilities set up in Ireland, logistic companies set up in Ireland. So I think it's an exciting future ahead for Ireland and North America and Europe in the next 5 to 10 years. And hopefully we get to chat about this again in the next few months, and we've got things to progress about.
Absolutely. I hope your regulators in Ireland are watching and they make a move in the right direction. And, part of Bar Capital's work is to promote and educate people and help find the right ways to open up this market.
Perfect. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Nan. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and I hope we get to chat again very soon.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It was a pleasure here as well.
Bye-bye.